Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for The Leftovers Season 3, Episode 2, Don't Be Ridiculous. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of The Leftovers, so I have to start with the spoiler warning for The Leftovers up to Season 3, Episode 2. If you haven't seen up to this point, you may not want to watch this video, otherwise some things may be spoiled for you. But before we start, I want to give a big shout out and thank you to Joseph Samuel, who created a new awesome opening image for my videos, which I am very pleased to use for the first time in this video. So as for the episode, I'm sorry, but I have to say that I wasn't quite as impressed with this week's episode as last week's. Don't get me wrong, I didn't think this was a bad episode by any means, but it didn't blow me away or feature that high quality that I'm now used to with this show. And frankly, I'm a bit worried Season 3 won't be as good as Season 2, but it's just one episode and not a bad one, so we'll see. So the opening title sequences rolls with this cheesy 80s sitcom music, and I literally could not believe what I was hearing. It was interesting that the opening sequence was left out of last week's episode altogether, and this week it came back with the same visuals but with some cheesy sitcom music. However, after researching, I learned that this song was in fact the same theme song to the 80s sitcom Perfect Strangers, which didn't surprise me too much as the song sounded incredibly familiar. So this was made more clear on why the song was chosen as the episode went on, because it featured the actor who was in Perfect Strangers, and the fact that the title of the episode is also a reference to Perfect Strangers, as Don't Be Ridiculous was the catchphrase of the main character Balki. Now, Perfect Strangers has been mentioned in the show several times before, as in Season 1 it was mentioned that the entire cast departed, and in Season 2 it was revealed that the actor Mark Lynn Baker actually didn't depart, and he faked his departure, but the rest of the cast really did depart. So in this episode we actually meet Mark Lynn Baker, so I see the connection. That being said, I still think having the Perfect Strangers theme song as the opening sequence of the episode was a bit too much and ultimately unnecessary, and it kind of clashes a bit too much with the tone of the show, so I didn't really appreciate it, even knowing why they did it. So the episode starts off with the death of Tower Man. Now, I myself was never a huge fan of Tower Man, so I wasn't too sad to see him go. It seemed like he was just one of those quirks that made Jarden weird. We get a bit of his backstory in this episode on how he went up to the tower to sort of suffer or, escape his pain or whatever, or atone, whatever you want to say. Kind of like, those people who put themselves in stocks and do all sorts of weird shit in that sort of encampment that was outside of Jarden last season. In fact, his ex-wife revealed she tried to crucify him first, but was arrested for doing so going on the tower was plan B. And this really strikes me as being all weird, just like all those people we saw outside of Jarden last year, like the dude who told Matt to hit him really hard and yell Brian. In fact, we learned that Tower Man's wife is the same woman we saw in that stupid Brian scene. And if you've seen my Season 2 review, I absolutely hated that scene. In fact, overall, I didn't like how all those weird people were hanging outside, how they acted, and thought it was a bit pretentious and a bit being weird just for the sake of being weird. And so I think Tower Man falls into that same category. In fact, I find it a bit curious that Tower Man even was allowed to be inside of Jarden, where everyone else who was all weird like him had to wait outside. It felt, so I'm not just sure why they allowed him into Jarden and not everyone else. And did they build that tower just for him, or was that tower already there? I don't know, but whatever. I don't really care. But anyway, it was interesting that Tower Man died and had a heart attack, but his wife tried to pass it off as if he departed, and she managed to convince a lot of people in the town of this. Nora had to interview them all for her job, but she knew that they were all full of shit. For one, because it's her job to deal with people who claim secondary departures when really there is no such thing. And for 2, her own personal demeanor has no room for bullshit. So as soon as she hears Matt was involved, she goes to him to get the truth. And she, of course, knows her brother well and knows how to get him to talk. And not only gets him to admit that he buried the body and promise his wife not to tell anyone that he actually died, but also gets him to take her to his body so they can dig it up and she can take pictures of it. In fact, the people that Nora worked with noted that she went the extra mile to that totally beyond, to make it clear, totally beyond a shadow of a doubt, that completely discredits this secondary departure claim. So it's obvious that this strong desire to discredit people's wondrous claims goes beyond simply doing her job. And this is made clear when we see her in town go up to a bunch of random people who are praying for the departed Tower Man and just says, "Hey, do you want to know what really happened?" So basically her way of calling out their bullshit. But Kevin tries to calm her down and insists just let those people have their fun. Let them believe what they believe. They can be wrong all that they want to, and eventually they'll find something else to be wrong about. But Kevin is all about keeping the peace, where Nora simply has no time for bullshit. So I talked about in my reviews of season 2 of the show how it had a very strong faith versus science theme to it. And I think the theme is still very strong in this episode, as Nora represented the doubter, someone who had no time for any sort of mystical claims. And the show itself plays with what is extraordinary and what is bullshit, as we see some extraordinary things happen, such as Kevin coming back from the dead. But then again, we see some extraordinary claims turn out to be bullshit, such as the claim that Tower Man departed. So that brings a sense of ambiguity to some of these other claims of mystical things happening, where we don't know whether or not it's bullshit or actually happening. And even if it's pretty apparent that it's bullshit, it introduces a shadow of a doubt that maybe it's genuine, such as Dean's claim in the previous episode that the dogs have infiltrated people, which is obvious bullshit. But then there's a lot of people talking on the internet saying, "Oh, maybe there are dog people." So the show does a great job of creating the shadow of a doubt and blurring the line between what is fantastical and what is just bullshit. And it's interesting how we see Nora deal with these different claims in this episode. In the case of Tower Man, she very blatantly recognizes this as bullshit and is on a quest to make it very clear to everyone that it's bullshit. Whereas people like Matt and Kevin are of the mind, why not just let these people believe what they want to believe? Even if you know it isn't real, it makes them feel better to have those beliefs, so just leave it alone. And on the same note, it's also interesting to see how Nora deals with the book that Matt wrote about Kevin, which is about Kevin being able to come back to life. Because it's interesting that with this topic, she doesn't seem to try to discredit it, but instead mostly just ignores it, as it's very clear that she and Kevin never really talk about it. And as for Matt and Michael wanting to turn him into some sort of savior figure, she just jokes about it a lot, to the point of making others feel really uncomfortable, which seems like a sort of coping mechanism in order to mock this whole idea rather than try to discredit it and attempt to point out to others how ridiculous it is. So the plot really kicks in when she receives a call from the perfect stranger's man himself, Mark Lindbaker, who insists he's calling on behalf of a third party who can let her see her departed children again. So Nora, of course, is really apprehensive towards them and in fact seems determined to go after them, as she insists to her supervisor that she be allowed to fly to St. Louis to follow up on these guys. And I do very strongly believe that her main desire is to discredit them just as thoroughly as she discredited Tower Man, because she has no tolerance for bullshit. And I think she was particularly angry because he tried to push this bullshit on her. So she flies out there to meet with Mark Lindbaker, who tries to sell her the pitch. And the pitch that is apparently a bunch of scientists found a way to send people to wherever the departed people went. And his pitch was actually very convincing, using scientific terms that sounded very rational and above board. But of course Nora thinks thinks it's bullshit, and these people are being incinerated and their money is being stolen, as they're basically, con artists scamming people out of their money and killing them. And frankly, I agree with her, and I think she's totally right. In fact, these scammers could in fact be taking a similar attitude as Matt and Kevin, that people whom they incinerate they're making them feel whole again before they incinerate, and they're leaving this world willingly and peacefully, as we see with Mark Lynn Baker, who feels in control again because of this lie, and all the testimonials that Nora watches where everyone feels at peace. So this is, I believe, a direct analogy to the lie that was told about Tower Man, a lie that makes people feel better, but Nora has no tolerance for it and a strong desire to expose that lie. So I think she feels the exact same way here as she did there. So when at the end of the episode she accepts the invitation to go to Australia, I do believe she does so on a quest to expose them as frauds, just as she exposed Tower Man. I don't think she believes for a second in their bullshit, even though while Mark Lynn Baker was telling her about the plan, we see flashes of her thinking about her missing children. I think that was just there to introduce doubt and to show how much she's still in pain from her children departing. But I think this she pushes that doubt aside, and it makes her anger towards these scammers even greater, and her quest even greater to expose them as frauds. And I think this is made really clear by the fact that she went the extra mile to print out a huge photo of Tower Man's dead body and put it up on the mural for everyone in the middle of town to see. It just goes to show how determined she is to expose people's bullshit, and she doesn't care if it makes them feel better or not. She simply has no tolerance for it. So she's going to Australia to do exactly that. In fact, I think that's made even more clear by her telling Kevin she's going there for work, when her work didn't actually authorize her to go there, at least not yet. But she does consider this her work, almost like her quest in life. So I also think the rest of the journey she takes in this episode leads her to this point, as we see how much pain she is in, as we get the answer to several mysteries introduced in last week's episode. And the most pressing one was what happened to her adopted baby, Lily. We find out that her biological mother, Christine, found her and wanted to take her back, and Nora didn't fight her at all. In fact, I think Nora sympathized with her as someone who lost her children and so couldn't bear to keep her away from her own daughter. But that doesn't stop her from missing Lily, as it's obvious she still does, and this still affects her, which is why she drove all the way from St. Louis to Kentucky just to have a look at her. And it was really interesting seeing her conversation with Tommy, as Christine is apparently still in touch with Tommy and told him about Nora coming to see her. And so Tommy went to check up on her, and he tells her the story of how he was adopted by Kevin, and when he sought out his real father, he found some asshole who didn't give a shit about him, and so he realized that he was already where he belonged and wished that he never learned about his real father. So I'm not sure exactly why he told her that story and what he was getting at. It seems like he was trying to tell her that she shouldn't have given up Lily in the first place, and that Lily was already where she belonged. And just because Christine was her biological mother doesn't mean she belonged with her. However, that seems a bit counter to what he was saying before, which seemed to be that she should leave Lily alone. But it was interesting, Nora's response, which was she wished Tommy never left her for her, and Tommy's response that he didn't leave Lily for her, he didn't even know she existed, he left her for his dad. And that was a pretty brutal thing to say. True, but brutal. It makes me wonder exactly what kind of relationship Tommy and Nora have, and what exactly was he trying to do by telling her that? Was he trying to give her tough love to make her feel better, or was he basically trying to intimidate her to leave Christine alone? I'm not entirely sure, because we haven't really gotten enough interaction between the two of them in this new timeline. And the other mystery that got resolved was a lot more minor one, and that was why Nora was wearing a cast in the previous episode. Now, I've seen a lot of people speculate about this last week, but I didn't really take much notice of it, and I didn't really care, either way, because I thought that if it was relevant, then that reason would be made clear soon enough, and it was. As apparently she broke her arm in order to hide the fact that she got tattoos of her children's names, which she then hid by getting a tattoo of the symbol for the Wu-Tang Clan, which she clearly is unfamiliar with, as she referred to them as the Wu-Tang Band. And this was revealed in a great scene where Nora visited Erica, who is no longer living in Jordan but is still nearby, as Nora apparently stopped by to see her on her way back from the airport. And it's interesting that the two of them are very close, because in season 2 they had an almost adversarial relationship, but it does kind of make sense that the relationship could grow to lead to them being very close. And Erica is not only able to see through Nora's bullshit, but actually make her feel a bit better by jumping on the trampoline. But all of this with Nora is just going on to show that she's still suffering quite a bit and is not at all okay. In fact, I mentioned in last week's episode, has everyone appeared to be living happily ever after, but we do see that with Kevin and Nora that it's all just a facade and that the two of them are still suffering. And this is depicted perfectly in the scene where Nora returns home early from her trip to see Kevin suffocating himself. He says that he doesn't actually want to die and he's just doing it to feel, and I take him at his word. I think you can take this at face value. Now, this scene struck me rather similar to the scene in season 2 where Kevin revealed to Nora that he was still seeing Patty, because in both cases we follow Nora the entire episode, which displays how much stress she's in and how much of her own shit she has to deal with, and it ends with Kevin dumping his own shit on her as well. However, unlike last year where the revelation of Patty scared her off, this time I think Nora understood this a bit more, as she could relate more to what Kevin's doing, as it's kind of similar to what she used to do by hiring prostitutes to shoot her while she was wearing a bulletproof vest. But regardless, I think she just wasn't in the mood to deal with this shit and tries to dismiss it. We then get this awkward moment where Kevin asks if she wants to have a baby, to which she gives a long, painfully awkward laugh. And I think she just couldn't help herself after the long, hard day that she had and the bizarre scene that she just witnessed. It was just so almost hilariously funny, that bizarre that he would say something like this. And her response was that they're both happy, so let's not fuck it up, which underlines some serious abandonment issues that she has with losing children, after losing both of her children in the departure and after losing Lily, so she obviously doesn't want to risk going through all that again. In fact, I'm a bit struck by the nature of her and Kevin's relationship, which in fact seems very superficial. Like, when they say they love each other, I'm not entirely convinced. And it seems obvious that she's not willing to open up to Kevin the same way that she opened up to Erica. So it strikes me the relationship is very superficial and has a short life ahead of it. So this made me think about the future scene in last week's episode where old Nora claimed not to know Kevin. Would actually be a lot more shocking to me if Nora and Kevin were actually still together at this point, as judging by this episode, it seems to me that their relationship is doomed and won't last another year, let alone many years in the future. So if the show wanted to do something really shocking, it would actually show them still together in this future timeline, where I think them being split up at this point is a foregone conclusion. But speaking of Australia, let me now get to this ending scene, which frankly I didn't really care for, as I mostly just found it a bit confusing and a tad silly as well. In fact, I think it was these scenes in particular that left a bad taste in my mouth for this episode. At first I thought the scene was taking place in like the same future timeline we saw Nora after we saw the nun ask about Kevin, because it would make sense that in this timeline Kevin has become this important important, religious figure. However, not only do we see Kevin Garvey Sr. at the end of the episode, but I also had to remember the newscast that we saw the other cop watching, where it stated very clearly that they were a week away from the 7th anniversary of the departure. So that clearly anchors these scenes to be taking place in the present, which quite frankly makes the fact that there appears to already be a devoted cult of at least 4 people that see Kevin as a savior, and they mistake this asshole cop for Kevin Garvey, bit hard to swallow. Now, it's been suggested that Michael may have put Matt's book over the internet as we saw him slam down his laptop when Kevin walked in the room, and perhaps Kevin Garvey Sr.'s presence there may signify that he's also helping to distribute this book as well. But even so, I find it really hard to believe that there would already be a group of followers so devoted that they're quoting strict scripture about Kevin and would go as far as to drown a random police chief just because his name is Kevin. For that matter, it seems to me that if they read it over to the internet, then they would know that the Kevin in question is American and these events took place in America. Either way, it seems like these women had very little information to go on before killing a chief of police. I don't know, maybe the following episode that follows up on this storyline will explain things better and clear some things up, but as of now, I just find this ending really silly. So my rating for Don't Be Ridiculous out of 10 is a 7, very good. As I said, not at all a bad episode. In fact, I thought this episode did an amazing job at exploring the kind of pain Nora is suffering and exactly why she's suffering, as well as answering a few lingering questions that we had after the time jump, such as what happened to Lily. And it further explains the relationship between science versus faith, and blurs the line on what is real and what is bullshit in a fantastic contemplative way that only this show can do. But if I were to compare this to other Nora episodes, I'd probably have to say that this was my least favorite, just because I like the other two a lot. As the first season episode, Guest is still one of my all-time favorite episodes of the entire series, and I particularly did not care for the final scenes in Australia, which struck me as a bit silly and didn't really have anything to do with the rest of the episode. So that's it for my review of Don't Be Ridiculous. Be sure to check back here every week as I continue to review episodes of The Leftovers. Also be sure to check out my channel for many more videos on other shows like Game of Thrones, Star Trek, Better Call Saul, The 100, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. Thanks a lot for watching.